What's up everybody and welcome to my channel. Today we're finally making an electronics tray for my motorcycle. In the last episode you noticed that we flattened the frame, which looks really nice, but now there's nowhere to put any of the electronics. So first things first, we're going to start with the rear section of the frame because we don't have as many electronics as we thought. Initially I was going to extend the electronics tray up to the front as well, but let's start with the rear and go from there. You can see in other Café Racer projects, they'll have some leave the battery mounted right here, some have it mounted at the bottom and you see it. Some make battery boxes that are an inch below the seat frame. Some have even made some that have a battery box 2 inches below the seat frame. And I think that just looks like an eyesore, especially when you're trying to get this nice triangle cut out in the middle. So my goal, tuck everything up above the lowest point so that even when you look at it dead on from the side, you're never going to see anything. Sorry for the rambling. First things first, I have some cardboard boxes that I'm going to use to mock up a battery tray, and then we'll go and make it out of sheet metal. So I got the piece made up. Sits fairly nicely under there. I got little marks where I want to put tabs. They're going to come up and around as you see there. Then we're going to drill a hole, put a nut to hold the panel in. I can take the panel out whenever, remake it and whatnot. So trace this onto the sheet metal and cut it out. Now we have it sitting basically where we want. Looking at it from the side, might be more like that. But from the side, perfectly flush underneath. The back needs to get bent down a tiny bit. Fairly satisfied with how it looks. Alright, so as you see, I bent this tab up and over so it holds in place. Same with the front ones, I bent slightly up. So now this is exactly where it's gonna sit. I think I'm just gonna weld on some tabs and call it a day. The tabs came out pretty well, if I do say so myself. I don't know if I was recording that, but now we can weld these on. So I cleaned up where I'm gonna be putting the tabs. I cleaned up the tabs as well, so make sure all the marks are lined up. That'll hold for now. I'm gonna put all of them in. Then I'll put my welding helmet on, zap the rest of it, and go from there. These tabs are kind of high, so I'm going to bend them back once they're fully seated. Grind them down a little more and then bolt them in. So in order for this to sit exactly where I want after I cut off these two front tabs, I'm going to hammer these back so they're nice and flat. And then from there, I still might trim these down a little bit, but we'll see where I want to drill the holes. So it came out pretty well, but considering the gap is larger here, these two tabs don't sit as nice as the rest of them. If you look here, these are all flush more or less. So I'm probably just going to cut these off, lengthen them a little bit like an L shape, and then I'll be able to bend them over nicely and radius it the same way. All these are radiused. And then we're going to drill through all of these the way they sit, tap the inner frame, and then this will be able to bolt in and come out if I ever wanted to take it out or remake it or something instead of welding it in. So
I'm going to finish up this. Not going to film it because it's kind of redundant since I did the rest of them. And then from there, we have to mount the IC igniter and the regulator. I'm going to put them here and leave it open so they can breathe. But we'll get to that in a second. As you can see, I finished the pan. There's still the little gap in the front. These two guys were little L shapes. And then I used the hammer, tapped it over the rail. So now they look really nice. And then all I have to do is figure out where to mount everything and put the weld nuts.
So I got these bolts off of Amazon. They're M5 by, I think, like an inch or so. I got them longer so I can utilize them in multiple places. And if I have to cut them, I will. This might be a scenario where I have to cut them, but we'll see. But yeah, super nice stainless bolts. Probably have to get zapped for the smaller rail. For these, should be okay. I also have to drill out these holes a little bit, and then clean up this tab, and then we're done.
Alright, so the electronics tray is all mounted. I think these panhead Allen key bolts look really nice. So I also got weld nuts so that when I put the battery in place, I could put a strap for it. And then with the Moto Gadget ECU, it needs to be grounded. So I also got the weld nuts so it has somewhere to mount to, so then you don't see any bolts underneath the pan. So from underneath, it's gonna look just like this, completely flat, minus two little panhead bolts, which are gonna hold on the seat. So I got these from Amazon. Same with these M5 bolts, which are really nice, but these happen to be M6. I don't know how, so I got to get those in M5 so that I can actually mount the battery and the Moto Gadget ECU and all that stuff. So for now, that's done. It's mounted. Still have to mount the IC igniter and the regulator, which I'm going to do right here since I want them exposed so that they get airflow, because those get pretty hot, hence the fact they have fins like this to keep them cool. So gonna make the brackets for that, get that all situated, and then we can get back to this once I get the weld nuts. Alright, so I just cut these two pieces out for the brackets I need to make. I'm gonna start with cardboard to see how exactly I want it, where exactly to bend it, and then we'll turn it into this. Alright, so now I'm going to bend these down, because I don't know if you saw how high it sits on the frame. Basically hovers like that, and then these have to bend down to catch the frame. Not sure how much. I'm going to double check. So I'd have to say that came out pretty well. See how it has the slight bend so that the rectifier sits above flush under the frame. Right now If you look up in there, it's dead even with the bottom of the frame. With that, it'll be slightly tucked up, which is fine. Now just have to weld that in. It looks pretty good as it is, but yeah, now I'm gonna have to make another one right behind it for the IC igniter. Alright, so this is where it's gonna be staying, just like that. So now I gotta weld it in. Alright, so I made the second piece. I still have to bend it and see exactly where I want it. Let's mop this up real quick. Alright, so the same thing, it has to get bent just slightly. Then we could tack it in. Let's weld these on. I'm using the bolts I have to hold them in place. I guess I'll bolt in what I have to first, get the proper thread depth, cut off the tops so then they're flush. As you can see, I just test mounted the regulator and the IC igniter. They look really good. I had to cut the I cut the bolts for the IC igniter because the tabs were a little less thick than the regulator, so those were perfect. Next will be the electronics tray. Slightly off. He's sitting something like that. Down things the ECU here, starter solenoid there. But here's the motor gadget M unit. Because it has grounds, the metal goes through it. It's gonna be sitting on top. I don't know which way I'm gonna have it. This is battery here, ground here. Might have it this way. Not sure if I should have it more centered because the wires coming up and whatnot. Because here there's going to be the hump. It's going to come down probably 1.5 to 2 inches above the frame, which should give me more than enough clearance to run all the wires. So I think this is going to be a little more towards the center, just so it has room for the wires in and out. Looks straight, a slight wiggle room. Just gotta tack down the other side so that this bolt is actually straight. Sick though. Nothing like eyeballing it. Last thing to do, make 2 tabs for the starter solenoid and make a tie down for the battery. And then everything for mounting the electronics and the frame modification kind of thing to go with it will be complete. Alright, so I just made these 2 little tabs that are going to be for the starter solenoid. I'm going to probably bend these about 1/4 inch from the bottom at a 90-degree angle, so then they have somewhere flat to sit on the electronics tray, and then we'll just tack them in on the corners and then slide the starter solenoid right on top of them. It's going to be like that. Let me just mark it so I have the spacing correct. Perfect. Now I'll tack the other sides and we're good. Man, shit, sturdy as hell. 2 little tacks and 16 gauge metal. Who would have thunk? So I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but this anti-gravity battery is a lithium-ion battery.
and it is literally, I think, 2.5 pounds. That means not only is it more than half the size smaller than the gel battery that I had on this bike, but the gel battery was 13.5 pounds, and this is like 2.4. So we're saving over 10 pounds just by switching out the battery. But this meant I had to get a regulator rectifier that was actually meant for a lithium-ion battery, or else you can actually burn it out. So this, I think it was like 160 bucks, which is kind of expensive, but you can see this is so light, so small and compact. You can mount it literally upside down if you wanted, but I'm happy I got this because it's going to make everything look much cleaner. And then not only that, it came with this little foam pad to mount it. Well, something like that. But in the area we're mounting it, I don't want it to intrude with the seat too much. So I took this foam pad and I cut it in half. So now it's half the thickness, which is great. This is going to be mounted on its side, so it's going to have that little bit of buffer from the steel pan, also isolate it from any vibrations and whatnot. And then for the tie down, probably going to use some of the extra foam just to have it ran over the top, so yet again isolate it from vibrations and from grounding out. Alright, so enough of that, let's make the tie down. I'm thinking I might want to do something with the battery tie down instead of just having it be one straight strip. So let me brainstorm this real quick before we start cutting up the aluminum, and I'll make it out of cardboard. Alright, so this is what I made up for the battery tie down. I still might want to do cutouts in the middle portion here to make it look nicer, but I mean, get started with this and go from there. So this is what I've come up with. Hopefully I can make this work because I have to do everything by hand. It's not like I'm going to have a CNC machine cut out these triangles and whatnot. But if I can make this happen, I'll be super stoked.
Alright, so a little change of plans. Scratch what I've said about making the battery tie down by hand. I tried, and it was a lot more difficult than I anticipated. So I actually reached out to Send Cut Send. I got a couple things made up, not just the battery tie down, which you'll see in a second, and it came out super nice. So if you don't know what Send Cut Send is, it is a laser cutting company that will help guys like me and yourself who work out of a basement or a garage and don't have access to a lot of the multi-million-dollar laser cutting machines or CNC cutting machines, but they make it accessible for us. I got a couple things made. What's nice is not only is it affordable, you could either draw up what you need by hand, which I showed you my drawing for the battery tie down, or you can draw it up on CAD if you have the programming, and you can upload it to their website. You choose not only the material you want, but the thickness of the material. If you want bends, you can have them put bends in it. It's super nice. This is not sponsored, obviously, but I'm glad there's a company out there that makes things like this accessible to the smaller builders, the smaller shops, or whoever who don't have access to these big, expensive machinery. They were super responsive when I had any questions, and once I figured out how to upload all the files to their website, it was a fairly easy process. Let me show you what we got. Gotta love that. All right. As you can see, this is the battery tie down I showed. These pieces are for my gauge cluster. So I didn't want those gauges to be separate per se, and I had nowhere to mount the ignition. So I made this up, bolts to the factory locations. It's going to be much more recessed than the factory one, much smaller than the factory one. Then what you see here, this is for a future project, still for the motorcycle. And then these are for a custom exhaust. I couldn't find any exhaust that I liked. I had to make up some mounting pieces in order to make it work. Took the measurements of everything. So this will be for a custom exhaust I'm getting made in the future. Let's get this battery tie down bracket out and the gauge mount and see how it looks. Hell yeah.
Look at that. I feel like you can't fully get the feel of it as it sits, but you can imagine once everything's on, headlight will be right here and they'll be recessed right behind it, so it's going to be super streamlined, super clean. I am so stoked on that.
Alright, so to give an idea, the battery is going to be sitting like this, and this is my template of the tie down. This comes over the top, folds like so, down the side, and then this tab will be right here. This bracket's a little bigger, so we got to bend it right here at these two corners, and then we'll measure from the top of the nut where we need to do the next bend. So let's get those first two down. Alright, so I bent it by hand. Took a lot more work than I anticipated to do it right. This side, as you can see, is the nicer side, because I was able to get it even, bend it all together. Alright, moment of truth. One side is bent up more because the front don't look too shabby, if I do say so myself. Now I gotta drill the holes, and then these tabs I'll probably trim down a little bit because it is hitting the back of the frame rail. I think that looks really good. So yeah, that's it for the electronics tray. Alright, so that's it for this video. We did get a lot done, even though it took quite a bit of time. We got the electronics tray done for the battery, starter solenoid, and the ECU. We got 2 brackets for the IC igniter and the rectifier regulator, which I think for doing 100% by hand came out really well. I'm ecstatic with the final product. It's everything I could have imagined and more. So I hope you enjoyed this video, because that was definitely not easy, definitely a learning curve, but the outcome was great. Regardless, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, leave them in the comment section below as usual. And if you feel like sticking around, feel free to subscribe. But until next time, peace. If I didn't say any of that, you wouldn't have any idea. Anyway.